I couldn't be more excited than to talk to my next guest here in Shawn Springs. And you're talking about the corner position. What a person to talk to, a man who spent 13 years getting it done in the National Football League. So if we're going to find what do great corners have in common, regardless of size, what is it?
I think the one thing all great corners have is that confidence, the ability to have that self-talk and talk down doubt. As a cornerback, all the receivers they want to score and they want to take you up top, and you could have 58 plays that you play in the game that are great, and 2 plays you get beat on, and everyone says that you had a bad game. So I think, as a corner, you got to be able to let things go and be able to respond and come back the next play.
The word transition. If maybe someone's listening to this or watching this and they hear that word, they don't know what it means. Can you explain that to them?
A transition is the ability to be able to close that gap and change directions. I think a lot of times you see corners who can the great ones can accelerate once they plant and drive that foot. They can accelerate and close the distance between themselves and the receiver. They can get spun around it. They can get right back on the hip of the receiver. So or guys who are just smoothing and pedaling and just everything looks fluid and it's not herky jerky and all over the place. So that's what I think about when I think about transition.
No, that's beautiful. I want to go back to your era when you played. You mentioned some great corners in the NFL during your time that joined you, but I want to talk about wide receivers that you're going up against and who gave you some trouble? Who were some of the great wide receivers, and why was it a challenge versus those guys?
Yeah, there was there were some great receivers in the era I played in. The one guy or the system that I hated to go against was Torrey Holt and those guys are the greatest, which is the modern day football today, the greatest show on turf. But when you talk about Isaac Bruce and Torrey Holt and Kurt Warner, what those guys were doing, they were dangerous. But the guy, once you were in man coverage, you had Marshall Faulk out of the backfield, so that offense and they could make adjustments on the fly and they were explosive. Randy and T.O. were the bigger receivers that I love competing against, but they both had their challenges where, if Randy was getting even with you, he was leaving. And Terrell, Julio Jones is a modern day version of Terrell Owens, but, if you let T.O. Get going and catch the ball, and you had to want to tackle him. So those were some of the tougher receivers that I faced. The ones that gave me trouble always seemed to be the smaller guys, the Wes Walkers of the world, chasing those guys around. Santana Moss, who was my teammate in Washington, I just hated chasing those little guys around because they moved all over the place.
I want to ask you specifically about Winfield. You've been around one of the best inside corners that we've seen in the NFL in the last 20, 30 years. What is it about that? Because when we're evaluating, we have guys on the draft board now, there's 2 different columns for outside guys and inside guys. What made him so special as somebody that could play inside?
Well, you're right. The nickel position has evolved in the last probably 5 years for sure. I can think of him now as a nickel spot. But Antoine, what was so unique about Antoine is that he was like a linebacker playing in a nickel. You could actually take an outside linebacker and put him in there, and he could fill in the gap. He could fill the B gap. He could take on a run as well as cover. He had the quickness to be able to stay with some of the smaller slot receivers, but he also had the physical toughness to be able to take on a run in a run game.
I want to see if you can give me a definition here, because you talk to DB coaches around the league, and they all have a different way of describing it, but some will say an edge, some will say a swagger, but there is a certain mentality. You hinted at it earlier. There's a certain mentality at the corner position. What is that? What is that psyche like for great corners like yourself? Because it seems like you all have it.
I think that the trick is the corners who don't have fear, and I'm talking about fear from a sense of that you're going up against the best, and you gotta welcome that challenge, and you gotta love that challenge. But the guys who are afraid to get beat won't make any plays. So you gotta have the confidence when you go out there. It's like, man, I'm gonna get after this dude. I'm gonna make plays, and I'm just gonna be able to line up and have that confidence that you prepared and your technique is there where you can cover anybody. That swagger, confidence, the ability to self-talk and talk yourself up. You gotta have it.
Well, last thing, and then I'm going to let you go. I'm just going to give you an opportunity in this forum right now. If you'd like to, you can thank your father for guiding you away from the running back position and to the defensive backfield, because I think he bought you some extra years there.
Oh yeah, he probably bought me like 8 more extra years. You know, my dad was the one who said, "Man, running back's a dying position. You need to play corner and play a long time." And that way these guys practice now, the way the game is fun and is exciting. I know a lot of people talk about this new era of football when you see Kansas City and the Rams go at it, or the Saints, and what you see Thomas been doing for the last probably 15 years. Man, I would have loved to play in this era of football, man. They throwing the ball around, man. They throwing the ball around. I love it. You got to go out there and get it.
Oh, hey, Shawn, man, thank you so much for your time today. And from your lips to every parent's ears, if your kid's an athlete, put him on the defensive side of the ball. I love it.
Make him the next Jalen Ramsey, man. Send him out there, Jalen Ramsey, Denzel Ward, or somebody like that, man. Save their bodies.
I love it, man. Hey, thank you so much for your time. That was awesome, Shawn. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
You can't talk about defensive football without bringing in one of the best players, one of the best coaches, one of the guys who's been mentored by some greats at the position, Dennis Thurman, former defensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, also the New York Jets. We want to talk about the cornerback position and what separates the good from the great. So when you think about DBs, what are the essential traits that the great ones have?
Well, first thing, they have a great vision. You have to have tremendous vision, okay? Then you have to have great feet, great hands, the ability to redirect people, understand how to strip people. The ball has to end up on the ground. If the receiver doesn't catch it, you've done your job. But a lot of guys think, hey, I got to hit the ball. You don't always have to hit the ball as a corner. Just make sure the receiver doesn't catch it. So teaching them how to strip a receiver by getting hands back, up under the armpits, separating the hands. It's just a lot of different things, but the eyes are first. Because if you can't see them, you're not going to go. You can't go with them.
So for so long in recent years, we've seen this trend where people go from smaller corners to now want a bigger corner. Having been a guy that has coached both, what are the differences with a big corner and those small nickel-type corners?
In the big corner, back then, it was about the physicality. Now it's the longer, angular corner that you're looking at, from Mike Haynes to Antonio Cromartie's. Those guys have length, okay? You don't necessarily have to be the fastest when you're long, because your length helps you in terms of, can you get the ball over me? Can you get the ball by me?
So those smaller corners, because you talked about the big corners and how they have to play. When you have a small corner, what does he have to have if he's an undersized player to be able to succeed?
Tremendous quickness. Because when you're in that slot, you're now dealing with someone who has a three-way go on you. And when I say that, the outside corner, most of the time he thinks, well, depending on his split, he's either going to go inside or outside or deep. When I'm dealing with that slot receiver, he can go inside, outside, or deep on me anytime he wants to, because he has more space to work with. So if he doesn't have tremendous short area quickness and underneath quickness, he will struggle on that slot.
So now you brought up Darrelle Revis' name, and in 2009, some would say he might have had the best season ever for a cornerback. They were talking about he may be the shutdown corner. It's only been a couple of those guys, and Deion Sanders and Darrelle Revis. What made Darrelle Revis the prototype at his position during his prime?
The first thing I noticed about him was his balance. He was never off balance. There was not one time in that 2009 season where I felt like he was out of position. He rerouted guys and made them go where he wanted them to go, not where they wanted to go. He was the reason why we went to the championship game in 2009 and 2010. Without him, we don't go.
Well, now, I know you're still close to the game. You still watch the game. So if you had to pick a young guy, a guy that is currently playing right now, that's kind of like the new prototype, who would be a young guy?
Jalen Ramsey.
Ooh, what about Jalen Ramsey? Makes him the prototype.
Well, because he's physical, he's long, he's angular, he's fast, he can change direction, he has excellent ball skills. Just stop talking. Work.
Ooh.
He doesn't need to talk. Let your play do your talking. Okay. The year before, he had a phenomenal year. Okay. Where did Jacksonville go?
Oh yeah, they went forward. They went to the championship.
When you have a truly great corner, he can lead your defense. Okay. He needs to just play. Last year, he started doing what? Talking.
Yeah.
Quarterbacks can't do this. Quarterbacks do. Just play. You're a tremendous football player. Go play the game. Lead your defense, because he has that type of ability. Stephon Gilmore's had 2 great years in New England.
I can't let you go, because there's a guy who was at one point the prototype that I don't think a lot of people really recognized or gave him enough credit. Chris McAllister, you coached him in Baltimore. People aren't familiar with Chris McAllister. Just talk about Chris McAllister and what Chris McAllister did to kind of put his impact on the league as a shutdown corner.
Because when Chris came out of University of Arizona, Chris was a top 10 pick. I believe he was the 10th player picked in the first round. The Ravens picked him. Chris was big, fast, physical. I mean, just when you look at him, you say, man, you're not playing corner. You're playing safety. You're playing outside linebacker. I believe when Chris retired, Chris was about 218 pounds as a corner. But he could still play the position, but he was playing it too high. He began to have success when he sank his body and allowed his natural gifts to take over. But Chris allowed us to do some of the things that Darrell allowed us to do, okay, when we were in Baltimore. And then we just took it the same, and when we got to New York, we let Darrell do those things.
All right, I said one more, but now I do have a final one. So what I want to talk about, because Everson Walls is still up for consideration for the Hall of Fame. Everson Walls wasn't a fast guy. How can you be a successful corner in this league when you're not fast?
Everson had tremendous ball skills, but more importantly, he had tremendous eyes, and that was his strength. He always played to that. You go watch tape. You'll never see him impress. I don't think he ever got impressed unless we were playing two-man, okay? Because he had a great ability to read the quarterback and understand route patterns and combinations. He took one interception from me on a slant. I swear to God, guys running a slant, and he broke on the ball before I did. And he just, my hands are here, and somebody's hands, they were his. I said, man, what happened? He said, man, I just saw it. What can you say? What can you say?
Oh, man, you have said enough. Thanks for joining the Move to Six podcast, giving us an education on the prototypes at the cornerback position.
All right, Jim, let's talk about some cornerbacks now. Looking at the cornerback position and maybe how that's evolved just from when you began scouting to where we are now. What has changed? What's more important now, the way the game is played, versus when you started?
I think length, like any position. I think when I was getting into scouting, DJ, you and I were about the same time.
Yeah.
You hear length a lot more than when you ever did when we were breaking in, in the early 2000s. I think that the success that they had in Seattle with Richard Sherman and Browner and some of these longer corners, I think that's been huge at the position. I just go back to this year's Senior Bowl game, contacting teams and reaching out and trying to get feedback about our rosters with the NFL teams. It was like, bigger guys the better. Bring as many long corners as you can. But again, you also have to be mindful of the teams that play a lot of off-man coverage, because those longer guys are going to struggle in that. So there are teams like the Patriots and Houston, teams that coming from that New England model where they play a lot of off-man, where you need transition skills. You need to have that transition quickness and reactionary athleticism at the top of a route to mirror. So again, it's kind of like two different packages, but I do think that height and length is at a premium.
When you look at that, and some teams obviously employ their corners differently, we talked about the wide receiver position, and Coach Billick used to always mention it, and mentioned on our wide receiver episode about building a basketball team, having guys that can do different things, smaller guys, a power forward, a point guard. When you look at the secondary now, with so many teams using motions and shifts and freeing up these wide receivers where some of these bigger, longer corners can't get on them, what about building a basketball team in the secondary where you have some of those big guys that can match up, but also you're going to have weeks where you see an Antonio Brown and maybe having somebody where the change of direction or the fluidity might be a little more important?
Yeah, I think that, again, I'm drawing on my own experience, but you go back to the Seahawks over the last couple of years. At one point, we had all our corners were 6 foot over guys with, 32.5-inch arms. And you get in the Super Bowl against the Patriots, and, you got Edelman, turning guys inside out. We had to play with Harold Simon in the slot, a little bit longer guy. Really wasn't fair. He's a big, longer guy. You can't match up and change direction with a guy like Wes Welker. So now you've seen the last couple of years they've played with Justin Coleman inside, who's a smaller corner, just signed a big deal with the Lions this offseason, and Justin played great in there.
Did you guys do anything on your board for any of the teams? I know everybody, has a nickel slot or star slot, whatever you want to call it, then they have outside guys. Has there been more specialization just in talking to people around the league or in your experience of saying, hey, these are kind of our press corners, these are some of the off corners, a way to designate them on the board when you're trying to set up and get ready for the draft?
Yeah, we actually created a nickel column, which we never had before, for those guys, for those smaller, undersized guys that we knew if they had to play outside, they might struggle in our scheme. But for what we would be asking them to do in the slot, they were perfect. And again, not a total scheme fit, every down scheme fit, but as much sub downs as teams are in now, that guy's going to be on the field 60, 70% of the time. So we had to account for that. So we kind of created a nickel position. And then I think what you're also seeing is a lot of teams trying to use safeties in the nickel spot. So just in this past year's draft, Nasir Adderley from Delaware, who went to the Chargers. I think he was a perfect example. Jaquan Johnson from Miami. I mean, there was a bunch of guys in that vein. Darnell Savage to the Packers in the first round. Just guys you can mix and match in the secondary. So you're seeing a lot more safety nickel versatility than you ever saw, 10, 15 years ago.
Dude, I can't thank you enough for your time, man. It's awesome stuff. I really appreciate you, bud.
Well, Buck, I tell you what, man, listening to DT, just give some friendly advice there to Jalen Ramsey. Obviously, he loves his game, but some nice advice there for him to just take care of your business and let's maybe pipe down just a little bit.
Yeah, pipe down a little bit because he is a very, very talented player, a guy who has everything that you look for at the position, the length, the tenacity, the toughness, the versatility. He can do it all. And so DT is just trying to get him to focus on the main thing, that is playing. Be a dominant player on the field. All the other stuff will take care of itself.
All right, we're going to get to who we believe is the prototype at the position. But before we do that, can we get a little wide shot there of you at the desk? Because these are some good-looking New Era hats right here, man.
I mean, there's some
kids,
nice.
Once we finish the last show, my boys they're hitting me up because they want different hats. So some of these things might
I think that's the
disappear.
one. I think that's the one that you should get your kids. I think the kids probably want the Cowboys because it's America's
Star?
team.
That's
I'm
your
sure
team. I thought you already took them all.
No. Let you have those.
Did you already have engraved like a Super Bowl champs on the back of that? On the back of those?
No,
hats?
I'm not going with the print of shirts or the print of hats or anything like that. I'm just going to lay low. I'm not going to make any bold predictions this year. Last 2 years, it hasn't bowled well for me.
All right, well, let's get back on track here, talking about these corners. Your opinion, who is the prototype at the position in today's game?
Man, it's so tough because I'm divided. I think, obviously, Jalen Ramsey has been mentioned because of the way he's able to press people. But I really like Marcus Peters because I think this game is about creating turnovers. And I don't know if there's a better turnover producer than Marcus Peters. He is a guy that does a great job of sitting off. He takes calculated guesses. There's a great understanding of jumping routes and reading the quarterback. It's something that you can't really find. And so, yes, he gives up a handful of plays, but, man, he delivers the kind of big plays that really decide games. So he is a prototype for me. Otherwise, it has to be Jalen Ramsey because Jalen Ramsey can walk up and play nose-to-nose. He can bump. He's the premier bump-and-run corner in today's game. And with that world-class athleticism that he also has to go with really a high football IQ, he is able to dominate on the island.
Yeah, to me, Jalen Ramsey would be my first choice. But when we talk about building a group of corners to match the group of receivers, I'd say Denzel Ward for somebody that can match up with those quicker players. Inside, can play outside. Anybody that's undersized and is an unbelievable change of direction athlete, I'll take my chances with Denzel Ward. And I also think when the ball's up in the air, in my opinion, he plays bigger than his size. He can get up the ladder and play the ball at the high point. So those would be the two I would come up with. Jalen Ramsey would be my 1A, and I would say Denzel Ward, even though he's a young player, would be my 1B.
Yeah, I agree. Both of these guys are absolutely terrific. Denzel Ward came on the scene and really didn't blink at all, didn't flinch, played like a top-5 pick, and so he is deserving of being up there. And I think it's funny, both guys that we've talked about, all these guys are first-round corners. Jalen Ramsey, Denzel Ward, both top-5 picks.
All right, no doubt. All right, it's time now for Training Camp Spotlight presented by New Era. And, Buck, we're looking at division winners from last year and identifying who we believe is the most vulnerable, man. They've got some competition coming their way, and I wouldn't be so confident about, as you would say, printing those T-shirts anytime soon. If you're going to go first, why don't you hit us up with an AFC team you think won the division last year, maybe the most vulnerable this year?
I'm going to talk to Bill O'Brien. I'm going to say, look, if Bill O'Brien, when you stand in front of the team, you need to tell them they need to have their antennas up because everyone in the AFC South is gunning for them. Even though I believe this team is talented, defensively they're loaded, J.J. Watt, Jadeveon Clowney, some of the other pieces that they have on that side, terrific. Offensively, you have a franchise quarterback in Deshaun Watson, arguably the best wide receiver in football, in DeAndre Hopkins, yet there's something that still leads me to be a little anxious about their reign at the top. It primarily exists with that offensive line. I know they drafted a couple young guys to add to it, but I'm worried about their ability to keep number 4 upright. And then when it comes to the running game, Lamar Miller hasn't necessarily got it done. They bring over Duke Johnson in a trade, but how are they going to use them? I just think there are more questions for the Houston Texans than you normally would have with a division winner. And I also think the rest of the division has gotten better. I like the Colts. I like what the Tennessee Titans have done. And I expect the Jacksonville Jaguars to be back. Of all the divisions, I think the Houston Texans are vulnerable as a division winner.
Yeah, I do think that's going to be a very not only competitive but a compelling division. So many different storylines there, what's going to take place, and I think they are a vulnerable team. I'm going to go over to the NFC, and this is, the old breakup line where this is not you, it's me.
Yep.
Okay, that's what I'm saying about the Chicago Bears. It's not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with Chicago Bears. I'm saying there's a lot of things right with the other teams in that division, and I'm looking mainly at the Minnesota Vikings. I think the Minnesota Vikings have a bounce-back year. Their offensive line is going to be better. Kirk Cousins is more comfortable in year 2. I look at the defensive personnel that they have. To me, it's more about what I think the Vikings can do versus what the Bears can't do. I think the Bears are a playoff team, but I'm not so confident they end up winning this division. I think the Minnesota Vikings are going to be right there. And like you said with your division, Buck, talking about the AFC South, when I look at this division, Packers, I believe, will be better. The Lions will be better. And I absolutely believe the Minnesota Vikings will be better. It's going to lead to a very compelling race.
Yeah, very, very compelling race. And it's one of those that you just never know how it's going to break. You got to be fortunate. Make sure you're healthy so you can get to the finish line with all your pieces in place, because the division will be decided in December. You want to be playing your best down the stretch.
I would add also one more. I mean, the Chiefs and the Chargers, that is going to be fun. I mean, I'm not saying the Chiefs are a fantastic team, but that is going to be a fun battle to watch those two teams go. Both 12-4 last year. Chiefs won the tiebreaker, but that's going to be a fun race to watch.
Oh, it's going to be a fun race to watch, because when you're watching the Kansas City Chiefs, it's all offense, and you worry about the defense. And then with the Chargers, they're a little more balanced in how they go about doing things. And so you're trying to figure out which team-building formula is the one that can produce the results. Do you go big on the strong side of the ball like the Kansas City Chiefs have done with Pat Mahomes and all those weapons on offense, or do you balance it out and find a way to stop them like the Chargers have been able to do with Derwin James and some of those other guys that they've added in recent years?
That was Training Camp Spotlight presented by New Era. And, Buck, getting to the end of the show here, why don't you tell the folks where they can find the Move the Sticks podcast?
Well, look, you can download the Move the Sticks podcast at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Make sure you check out the entire Move the Sticks position prototype series at NFL.com/MTS prototype. For more videos, also check out our new YouTube channel at YouTube.com/NFL podcast.
I love that we have the YouTube channel now for all the podcasts. So that's all of them. That's Around the NFL. That's Fantasy. That's Damashek. That's Game Theory and Money, as well as the Move the Sticks podcast. Again, YouTube.com/NFL podcast. That'll be your home for all your podcast needs. That's going to do it for us. Thanks for watching Move the Sticks, presented by New Era.